So it's May Day,
Yes,
2017, and I'm very fortunate today to be interviewing Gille de Vlieg, who's one of South Africa's foremost women photographers. And that's interesting for me because it seems that the women photographers in South African history have had much less attention than the men. The men photographers are always getting lots of publicity and attention for being sort of brave and heroic and so on. But the women photographers, particularly those who were taking photographs during the struggle era, received much less attention, but they were brave and courageous and went into the front lines, as you did, Jill. And you were photographing funerals, you were photographing displaced farm workers, people who'd been tortured and badly beaten in our country, and you were very much in the front lines of what happened. But maybe just this point about the women photographers, what is your sense of that?
I think what you're saying is true, but in my own case, I think I am to blame as well, because I really saw myself much more as an activist rather than a photographer. And so while I realized that my photography was valuable, I saw it as valuable in an activist type of sense. Okay. And so I didn't feel sufficiently a photographer per se to actually market myself. So I was rather negligent about doing any marketing and any promotion of myself as a photographer. I was much more comfortable with having interviews or having articles written about me as an activist who happened to take photographs. So I do think in my case it really was my own fault. But I do think also again that your point is very valid.
In the media, it seems that particularly around the time of the Rise and Fall exhibition, it was the male photographers that got the extensive coverage in the media, and the women photographers who were also very significant were very much just also rans in some ways and got a mention.
I think also, in my own case, there were times when I was on the front line, but most of my photographs are actually taken from behind the lines because of being an activist. So I was with the people doing the protesting, with the people who were being removed, with the people or listening to the people who were being chased off farms. So in that way, it wasn't the skit and donna, that one sometimes sees in photographs, particularly in press photographs. It was much more person to person and going behind the scenes to see.
How did that impact, do you think, on the images that you produced?
I think they're much more personal. I think they're softer images. I think I hope they actually reveal the type of person who was doing the protesting at that time. And also the people behind those people, like the mothers, for instance.
Right, okay. Yeah. Okay, so you're trying to tell the story from much more as a story of people who were involved in a situation.
Much more so, yeah. And I think that was due to the circumstances as well. I was privileged that I was accepted by the COSAS youngsters of Tembisa, for instance. And it got to the point where I was actually asked to come into various funerals, to come into meetings. And in fact, if I wasn't there, they sort of wondered why. So I was in a very, very privileged position. And frequently these youngsters would take me to their homes and they would introduce me to their mothers in particular. And they wanted me to explain why these activists weren't in schools, why they were out on the streets protesting, because the parents were deeply disturbed by their actions.
And maybe they thought you seemed to understand, so you became a kind of interpreter.
They hoped that because I was this older woman, that I would be able to be a little bridge, perhaps, between them on the streets and the mothers cooking and ironing and washing at home.
And they were concerned because they didn't know what was going to happen to their young kids and they weren't in school.
Of course, they were deeply concerned, and they felt that schooling was vitally important, even though it wasn't necessarily the best schooling.
I think even a lot of the parents nowadays who are parents of students in the universities are concerned that the current issues on the campuses
I
are
think it's very similar.
impacting on their education. But we were talking about the 80s, really. Maybe you could tell us a little bit about how you became an activist, or what was your journey to this place, Jill?
Well, I'd always been, well, not always. As I got into my later 30s and into the 40s, I knew that South Africa was a very disturbed country. And obviously the June 16 situations in the various townships, particularly Soweto, but in the other townships, it disturbed me enormously. And I used to be deeply upset by it all. And then as I became sort of into my early 40s, I felt that it was no longer any use being deeply upset. I needed to do something about it. And I had been reading Andre Brunk's Rumours of Rain, I think it was.
Yes.
Where he describes what the security police were doing. And I realized this wasn't fiction, this was fact, written as fiction. And again, I was deeply upset by what I had been reading in the book, and I just felt that now I really do need to do something. And I had this realization. I almost had a little private vigil. I sat up and just wanted to try and think this through. And I came to a realization that if I didn't stand up publicly, then I felt that apartheid was doing it in my name as a white woman. And I had to say, no, you're not.
Okay.
And then I wondered what organization to join. And immediately the Black Sash came into mind because of their protest stands along Jan Smuts Avenue.
Yes, and you photographed some of those as well.
Later on, yes.
Yeah. So you actually stood there on some occasions.
Yes.
Yeah.
And the first time I stood, I was so proud of being there. I just knew I was doing the right thing.
Yes. And what was the placard that you were holding?
I can't actually remember.
Okay.
It might well have been around detention.
And you stood on the corner of Bolton and Jan Smuts or somewhere like that?
One of those. Yes, I think it probably was there.
Yeah.
Yes, for the first time.
Okay. So the Black Sash, tell me a little bit about the modus operandi, how they went about what they were doing. They used to stand usually as single women
we had
on
to
the street
stand
corners.
at this particular time. Well, in the 80s, in the mid-80s, certainly after the various states of emergency, there were these laws about illegal gatherings.
Yes.
And it came to be that you could only stand as one individual person, supposedly out of sight of the next individual person. Otherwise, you were an illegal gathering.
Right.
And in Port Elizabeth, I think it was, this came to be so ridiculous that when you were handing over your banner to another person, the police actually arrested those two women in PE because they were waiting for that to happen. Fortunately, it didn't happen to us in Johannesburg. So we would line the whole of Jan Smuts from around Rosebank area right through up to where Varsity is.
And would stand there well dressed,
Very
middle
well
class,
Very
prim and
middle
proper,
class.
but with a banner which was
Yes,
highlighting.
Yes. And you'd get responses from motorists. Some of them would toot and wave, and others would, shout at you, and which wasn't terribly pleasant. But I mean, you were saying what you felt, which was
so that
very
led you into Black Sash.
That led me into Black Sash, and I was very fortunate in that I was assimilated very fast and became quite an activist within the Black Sash. Initially around the advice office work. I used to go in every now and then. But then we were getting calls to the advice office from Driefontein in particular, which is near Piet Retief, saying we think we're going to be removed.
Right.
And so as volunteers, we went down to Driefontein and to see what was happening and to meet with the people who were leading the resistance. The main person at that time was Saul Keys, who was later shot by the police. And so I became very interested then in rural areas that were under threat of removal in one way or another.
Yes.
Yeah.
Okay. And so you started really as an activist.
Yes.
And moved into photography.
Yes. And I started carrying a camera with me.
Okay.
Yes.
Okay. Just because you wanted to document what was happening?
Just because I was fascinated by what I was seeing. This was a whole new world to me. I'd never been in a black rural area before. And I wanted to document that. I wanted to record it.
Okay.
And then I started also taking Paul Weinberg into these areas. We would leave at 3 o'clock in the morning and go off to Turpin. He would wander around taking photographs, and I would chat to people. And that's how I then became part of Afrapix, because sitting in a field, actually in the neighbouring area called Kwangema, Paul asked, didn't I want to join Afrapix?
Okay. Afrapix was a collective?
Yes.
Okay.
Of freelance photographers, mainly freelance photographers.
Who had some kind of activist bent.
Yes, very bent.
Very bent, okay.
Yeah. Yes, and my initial response to him was, yes, but I'm not going to be the secretary.
Okay, he was looking for a secretary.
Well, I knew they were.
Okay.
So I came in as photographer, but I had never actually processed my own film.
Okay.
And Paul was the one that actually taught me how to process the film, and Cedric Nunn, another photographer, was the one that actually taught me how to print black and white.
Okay, okay. So people are obviously significant at different points in your life.
Very much so.
You speak about people like Paul Weinberg, Cedric Nunn. Just backtracking a little bit, was there anyone in particular who got you into activism in the first place, do you think?
No. I have a brother who had been very, very active within the trade unions and setting up trade unions around the Durban area. And he had gone into exile, but I was being a wife and mother.
Yes.
And looking back on my life, I came to realize that I was waiting for my daughter to leave home before I felt I could actually do what I felt I needed to do. And I did make a mistake in that area, because it was actually not my daughter that needed me home, it was my son.
Okay.
And I think he struggled with me being away so often.
Okay, so Afrapix, how did that work then? Because you'd been going off with Black Sash to Driefontein.
Yeah.
And
well, we were very much left to our own devices, really. It was a very loose arrangement. I mean, we did have meetings where we came together and discussed what we had been doing. And eventually, as we grew larger as a collective, we got an administrator called Diane Stewart, because we were getting a lot of requests from other organisations that were resisting apartheid and who were keen to use our images.
Oh, okay.
And so we got to the stage where we started sending out monthly packages overseas for people who were pressurising the embassies or pressurising the apartheid government itself.
Mm-hmm. So you were actually, your pictures were used. I was talking earlier with you about this publication from Oxfam, We Cry for Our Land.
Yeah.
And some of your pictures were used in that publication. So the pictures were used by international organisations.
Yes, very much so.
And that helped obviously to raise awareness overseas about what was happening in South Africa.
Yeah, and that tied in with what Black Sash was doing too, because one of the ways that Black Sash would try and pressurise the apartheid government was also through lobbying various diplomats and also informing newspapers, because often we were seeing things that the newspapers didn't know about, or hearing about things that the newspapers didn't know about.
South African newspapers.
Yeah. And of course there was an international presence here as well, quite a large one.
Yes.
So they were also very valuable.
So packages were going out. Were you paid at all by?
No. And this was all part of the activism.
Yes. Yeah.
I mean, we did get paid. We had a sort of scale of payment, and the lowest was, I think, it was R5, and that was to NGOs who weren't really funded, and that seldom got paid.
Okay.
And was often passed around, your photograph.
That's what they had to pay Afrapix for an image, R5. Okay.
And then it got very expensive, I think, something like 15 Rand to an NGO that was actually had funding.
Okay.
And then there was the business side of things, which was supposed to help us I don't know how we stayed together actually, because we really had no money.
It was love rather than money, I guess, so an attachment
Yes.
to feeling
Yeah.
that people were actually helping to
Yes.
contribute to something.
Very much.
Mostly white photographers, is that
Mostly white photographers. I mean, a smattering of black photographers, which, you know, it was a very flexible organisation, but there were certain standards we wanted to keep. Sometimes people didn't quite understand the ethos of Afrapix, I think, and wanted to try and make it a little bit more commercial, perhaps. Then they realised it was, you know, that wasn't what Afrapix was standing for. We had lots of meetings, quite a few disputes,
Yeah.
but yeah, and people came and went. You know, there wasn't any strict conditions as to whether you stayed or didn't stay.
Yeah. So in this time, I'm thinking really now that we're talking about the mid-80s.
Yeah.
How did your photography evolve during that period, would you say? You started off going to Driefontein.
Yes. And then, actually, it was Driefontein became the catharsis for me extending my ability to take photographs, insofar as we wanted to raise publicity around the fact that we felt Driefontein was going to be removed very quickly, or very soon. And we had a vigil in the old Khotsa house, the one that was bombed in De Villiers Street later on. And it was a 5-day vigil, and there was a whole program around that. And my part in that was that we did put up some photographs in that foyer, which was a lovely foyer, it was a little round foyer. And they were actually of an urban removal rather than a rural one, but those were the photographs we were able to get at the time. And then there was a whole program of speakers, lunchtime speakers, as well as other events, which was drawn up by Jill Wenzel. She created a very good program, actually. And my role was that I decided I would fast for those 5 days on bread and water, because Mrs. Shongwe from Driefontein had been explaining to me how they saved money to buy Driefontein prior to the 1913 Land Act. And it was by living on bread and water. Yes.
So you went on bread and water?
Yes, and I slept in the chapel in Khotsa House. And then one night, just prior to going to sleep, I heard these voices in the foyer, and there were people looking at the photographs. And there was 3 young males, and I asked them, did they know what they were looking at, and then described some of the images for them. And they turned out to be youngsters from Tembisa Township, who had come from a meeting with the UDF, and who had offices upstairs. And so I gave them the program and said, you know, if they wanted to come, they could come, and they would be very welcome. Anyway, the one came back, and his name was Gregory Tulare, and I said to him, oh, that's very nice, have you come to listen to the speaker, the lunchtime speaker? He said, no, I've come to talk to you. Okay. Which surprised me enormously. Anyway, he started coming to visit when he knew I was in the advice office, and we would go and get some takeaway and go and sit in Nebe Park and chat. And then eventually, this was in 1983, and then later on in 1984, he actually asked me to come into Tembisa. And at that period, white people were not allowed in black townships unless you had a permit.
Yes.
Anyway, I went in, very wide-eyed, no knowledge of what a black township looked like, or you know, how people lived there. So he was my big introduction into the more active side of activism. And the
he was involved with the UDF?
He was involved with COSAS.
Okay. And
he was an organizer in Tembisa around COSAS. He was detained many, many times over. But through him, I got to know other COSAS members and other COSAS members in other townships and that sort of thing. So I was very fortunate in having this link to rural areas as well as urban areas.
And the photographs that you were taking then, when you were going into Tembisa?
Yes, and then it started being more just taking photographs of what I felt was interesting. Then it started being, people started also seeing me as a bit of a resource. If people were injured, they often phoned to say this person's been injured in a fight with the police somewhere or other, and then I would take them into Hillbrow Hospital or hospitals outside of Tembisa, because they were often arrested when they went to the Tembisa hospital. Also started getting lawyers for them. There was a particular case. Started taking photographs of their injuries. Started then going to funerals, taking photographs of the funerals. My car, I had a Volkswagen station wagon at the time, and the hearse never arrived for one of the funerals, and I was asked if I would use my car as a hearse to bring the body from the home to the hall where they were having the service. So I was being integrated by these youngsters into various activities.
So you were still continuing as an activist in a sense,
yes,
while you were also taking the odd picture as you went along.
Yes, it was very much that way actually, because quite often I would be in front of the funeral procession, and sometimes they were very long, with my car, and then a lot of the youngsters that I knew would be the marshals.
Yes.
And they would get hot, so then the jerseys would go in my car, I'd drive a little bit, stop, go walk towards the procession, take photographs.
Okay.
And most of that was all on my own, but trusting that these youngsters would be looking after me.
And they obviously did, yes.
They did.
Yeah. Okay. The women photographers that you came across at that time, did you have much engagement with them?
Not really, no.
You worked in fairly solitary ways.
We were all working in quite solitary ways, really.
Yeah. Okay. And then at some point you were arrested.
Yes, that was in the June 86 emergency.
Yeah.
Yes.
What happened?
I don't really know, because I know what happened to me, but I don't know why. I still don't know why they ever detained me. Because anyway, I had actually gone to Deduza the day before to warn someone to visit a friend who also worked at the Black Sash advice office actually, and her brother had been one of the COSAS youngsters that were blown up by hand grenades, which was a very famous case that was heard at the TRC, etc., etc. And her older brother was an activist as well, and he happened to arrive when I was still chatting to her, and I said, I hear there's another state of emergency happening. So he went into hiding, and I was the one that got arrested. But that was in my own house in Craighill Park.
Yes.
And about 12 o'clock at night, there was this big banging on the door. And then, the usual open up, it's the police type of thing. And they came into the house. I have written all of this up, actually. There was a major. So obviously I was considered very important. And two guys that I always thought were like these tight jeans, running shoes type young people that thought they were really important, full of themselves, guys, and a female.
4 people.
Yeah, I think it was 4 or 5. I can't remember now. But anyway, and they searched the house. They searched the house very thoroughly. My son was there in his bedroom, and obviously feeling rather nervous and wanting to protect his mother and not sure how. There was a strange incident insofar as the major went behind a bookshelf that I had, and I used to do a lot of sailing and racing yachts. And so I had a lot of medals that I had won. And he looked at all these medals hanging up on the back of this bookcase and said, "Whose medals are those?" And I said, "They're mine." And then later I was put in the car and taken up to John Foster Square.
They didn't say why they were arresting you?
They said they were arresting me under section 10B, and at that time that was 2 weeks detention. So I thought, oh, that's not so bad. But then later it got changed to the emergency. It was made retrospective as the emergency regulations. under the emergency. So that was an indefinite detention then. There was a funny little incident on the way because as we were driving off, they'd put a lot of stuff that they had, some booklets and things that they had taken into the boot. And as we were driving, the boot flew open.
Okay.
So I tapped the driver on the shoulder and said, "Excuse me, do you know the boot's open?" So they stopped the car and got out. So I was taken to John Foster Square, and many people had been detained that night. And I came to realize this because of the color of the hand towel that you had to use after your fingerprints had been taken was black. So, and then the major asked me to come to his room, so I was taken to his office, and he sat me down and he said, "And now, Mrs. de Vlieg, how are you feeling?" I said, "How do you think I'm feeling? It's cold and I'm sitting in John Foster's." And then he said to me, "Are you happy?" So it was very strange. And then he revealed that he too sailed yachts.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, so then I was put in a car along with another young woman and Sheila Brokenshaw. And we were driven off and we didn't quite know we obviously didn't know where we were going because they didn't tell us. And it ended up that we were put into Hillbrow police station.
Okay.
So that's where I spent the rest of my detention.
Okay, and how long were you there for?
37 days. Yeah.
And no reason or no knowledge?
I was
to why?
never given any reason whatsoever. I was well, I was asked questions. It wasn't truly an interrogation. And, I'd been sitting thinking, why are they detaining me? And even now, I think the only reason I can come up with is that they knew the Tembisa police had probably alerted the John Foster Square security police about my activities in Tembisa. And they apparently thought I was running guns or something similar. And so when the John Foster Square security police came and started asking questions, they told me that they knew all about me. And I had felt that I needed to take the questioning to them as much as them to me. I needed to almost take charge of this. And so I said to them, I recognize that this is going to be a difficult interview because the way you think about South Africa and the way I think about South Africa. And I said, there's another thing, you're both males and I'm a female and I'm very strongly feminist. Oh, they said, we didn't know you were a feminist. So I said to them, I thought you knew all about me.
It's quite funny looking back, but it was probably a scary time.
It was a little scary, but only because I wasn't scared for myself. Greg Tulare had gone into exile just prior to this state of emergency, so I knew he couldn't be damaged. I also wondered whether they wanted to question me about my brother who had gone into exile much earlier than that, and I knew very little about his activities anyway. I was just very nervous of saying something that I found quite innocent that they might interpret as something damaging to another person. That was my main concern.
So they held you and then after 37 days they let you go?
Well, yes, there was a court case in I think it was the Pietermaritzburg High Court where it was agreed that lawyers could see detainees because up to that time they hadn't been allowed to. And I think that was the case that probably then they said, well, there's no point in holding her any longer, so they released me.
Okay, and then what was the next move for you?
Talking. I'd been in isolation. It wasn't really solitary because people came into the cells, but in isolation for quite a while, so I just wanted to talk.
Yeah. Okay.
And linking up with my friends again. And I want to mention here too, how much people somehow allowed you to know that you were being supported. One of my friends, Glenda Glover in particular, she came because the Hillbrow Magistrates Court is very close to where the cells are. And there's a little alley there. And the one day she came one Sunday. Weekends are always the worst because it was very quiet. You know, there was the usual coming and going during the week of various prisoners. But during the week, because of the courts not being opened, it was always very quiet. And then I suddenly heard this song called "I Just Called to Say I Love You."
Yes.
And I knew it was Glenda because we played that CD just before, or tape, I think it was still at that time, in her house just before I was detained.
Okay.
Yeah.
And she was singing it as she was going?
No, she was playing the tape in the car, so I could hear her, and I knew she was there. And then my window from the cell, I could sort of climb it so I could see out of the window, but I hung on the bars. And it was opposite the magistrates' courts where there were breeze blocks. And she put a marigold, bright orange marigold in there.
Oh, wonderful.
And those were the times I cried, actually.
So people were trying to show that
Yes.
you were being thought about
Yeah.
and they cared for you.
Yeah.
Okay. Okay. So, Jill, from all these experiences that you've had, what would you say that are the big things you've learned about people, about life, about South Africa, about politics?
Well, politics never seems to end, and it does seem to have a cyclical
Yes.
component, because so
Yeah.
many of the issues we were dealing with then we're dealing with now again,
Yes.
particularly around education and
Yeah.
many other evils and ills.
Many things are not sorted out in our country,
Many
obviously.
things are not sorted out. And unfortunately, we're going into a time of people feeling rather hopeless about to do something again. And I'm hoping that an activist element will start rising again to fight what has been happening recently. And it does seem to be happening, particularly with young people, which is lovely.
Reflecting on Freedom Day the other day, April the 27th, and the extent to which we are or are not free as a country, I guess one of the things is that we are free of that midnight knock on the door, for the most part. For some reason it was always midnight. Maybe that's when they knew you would be at home. But we are free of the midnight knock on the door, the arbitrary dragging of people off to police stations and so on. And that's obviously something that we can celebrate. And many people have been freed from the having no electricity, no water, no roofs over their heads and so on. So the government over the last 25, 27 years has achieved a lot in that sense. And obviously there are many issues that still concern us. So do you feel now that we are free? What do we still have to do? You mentioned education.
I feel that we're having the country taken away from us. It's slipping away from under our feet without the depth of change that was needed post-apartheid.
Were the mistakes made in 1994 or in that Cadessa process?
I think there had to be. The fact that Cadessa even happened was really a miracle. That we managed to get away without having a very violent civil war, I think was amazing. I think we were all very naive post-94. I think we didn't know and understand the depth of change that needed to happen within the country. I think we believed that the ANC leaders were totally devoted to the Freedom Charter and to the Constitution that later evolved. And we felt that they would make every effort to achieve those ideals. I think
some of them probably were.
I think some of them were. I think some of them still are. But unfortunately, others have fallen by the wayside and see it much more important to have their own personal bank balances increased rather than attending to the needs of the poor. So it's very disappointing. It's very disheartening.
Yeah.
And it's easy. One of the activists said to me the other day, well, revolutions are cyclical as well. They're generational. And I'm thinking, I'm impatient. I'm getting old now. I want to see it happening. I'm also thinking of all the the pain that so many people went through in fighting apartheid. And I'm thinking particularly of women, because so often they bore the brunt of so many different things. They were the ones that were concerned and saved the money for their children to be able to achieve. They kept life alive. And so often they were put into desperate situations with their children being killed or going into exile and never knowing what happened to them. And they themselves also having to stand up to bullying officials, particularly in the rural areas, because often when the officials came into these rural areas, the men were away working elsewhere, and it was the women who had to stand up.
In fact, it was the women who started the movement against the pass laws.
Yes, there was a very strong movement, actually, and particularly in the Zeerust area.
Yes. Yeah.
And that actually was ignored by the ANC. It was a very interesting story.
Yeah, people like Francis Bard and people like that played a very important
role. And also women from one of the rural areas that we became involved with, called Brocklachter. The chief's wife there was arrested and taken to Pretoria during that period. Yeah.
So, Jill, if we think now about the role of photography in these days in democratic South Africa, the role of young photographers, you know some of their work. What do you see the role being? What is important for people to take forward in this profession?
I mean, photography is a very individual type of thing to do, and I know.
Should it be, or is it just inevitable? I've wondered sometimes if young professionals in many fields actually need to be more connected and more working with each other, or is it inevitable that it's a solitary profession?
I think it's always going to be inevitable because there are no set rules to photography. I mean, there are the technical rules, but there are no personal rules attached to it. And you have to photograph what actually motivates you the most. So there is always a self-reflectory element attached to that. I was very conscious quite often of hiding behind my camera.
Okay.
Because you had to, at that time, lift it up to your eyes and look through the viewfinder. So you were, in many ways, hiding behind the camera. And was much more comfortable hiding behind the camera than I was in front of the camera. And so nowadays, it's what inspires you, what really motivates you. I hope that there will still be a strong social documentary element to photography. I think that's always very important.
To document what's going on.
To document what's around you, what interests you, to show how people are living their lives. That's always a very important thing.
But there's not so much money in that as maybe in the more commercial.
There isn't money. There isn't money in photography unless you really go out into as you say, a professional way of working. And that is not necessarily your passion. I mean, that was one of the struggles that we had with Afrapix too. Our passion was social documentary work, but that, as you say, doesn't give you a lot of money. So often you had to try and do something different.
And we really need, if people are going to maintain that tradition, we need people who are really committed, who have an ethical perspective on society.
It can be even that they have an unethical one.
But they do the work. Okay.
Yes, and I do think that there is energy here in South Africa for that, particularly amongst young people.
Yes, and the work of the Market Photo Workshop continues in terms of training and developing
I think
photographers.
That's wonderful. It's very important. And of course, there's the inevitable selfies everywhere.
Yes, okay. So everybody is a photographer nowadays.
Well, there is that type of thought, yes. And I do think that if you're going to be serious about being a professional photographer, you have to put a lot of thought and effort into it because of that.
Yeah, okay. Thanks, Jill. It's been very good talking with you. And thank you for all the work you've done for our country over so many years. And your
It was actually
insights.
my pleasure. It was really important for me to do, for myself. Yes.
Good.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Wait.